everybody, and welcome along to this edition of Heroes and Icons on LearMedia.tv. And we have an email if you want to make any comments or suggestions for the show. It's info@LearMedia.tv. And all our shows, you can find them up on our YouTube channel, which is LearMedia TV simply. And this is episode 8 of this short series of Heroes and Icons of the 20th and 21st century, 19, maybe we might stray into it as well. But if you have any suggestions for the program, let us know. And we really thank you for all of you who've taken the time to look at these. And we hope that they have informed you a bit about the particular hero or icon. And they're not many of them, or some of them, would not be cast as heroes, obviously. That there'd be people who came to prominence for different reasons during their lifetime, whether it be for philanthropy, whether it be for sporting prowess, and etc., or political in the political arena. But our subject today certainly does not fit those categories, and he is notorious for all the wrong reasons. So there you go. Some of you may have heard of him, like myself, may have caught a film of his. But today our focus is on Babyface Nelson, who was on a crime spree in the 20s and 30s, and I suppose there was a lot of them around that time. There was the but there was John Dillinger, of course, and there was Bonnie and Clyde, Al Capone, which was captured so wonderfully in The Untouchables, where De Niro played him in The Untouchables, and of course he was put away in prison for taxes, which got him in the end. There you go, you catch up to everyone in the end, so you have to keep up to date. Anyway, and of course Babyface Nelson, I suppose there have been so many films done in his life, and we mentioned them at the end of the show. And you can, there's some of them, most of them are available. I think all of them are available on some platform or another on his life and times. But for this particular program, for our own purposes here on this program, we're going to just concentrate on a pen picture of Babyface Nelson. Now, of course, he was born Lester Joseph Gillis. That was his actual name, in case you may know. He was born on December the 6th in 1908 in Chicago, Illinois. Now, 1908. Now, I don't know. I was looking at what kind of a home he had and what kind of a setup he had at home. I don't know exactly what it was, so I'm not going to say some things I cannot get I suppose, confirmation of some of the characters involved. So we won't mention anything that we're not certain about. But anyway, so he was born, as I said, on December 6, 1908, and he was known as George Nelson by some people, and also as Babyface Nelson. And I suppose the overview of him, he was an American bank robber who became a criminal partner of John Dillinger. And that's when he was in prison in Crown Point, Indiana, and he helped Dillinger escape from that prison. Later, the FBI formally identified Nelson and the remaining gang of bank robbers as public enemy number 1. And when you were designated public enemy number 1, there was no interest in capturing you. Well, there was, but you can be shot on sight, dead or alive. So there you are. I suppose there's some speculation how he got his name, Babyface Nelson nickname. It derived from Gillis. That's Lester Joseph Gillis, who the subject of the program is. He was a small man with a handsome face. However, in the professional realm, Gillis's fellow criminals addressed him as Jimmy. But as a violent bank robber, Babyface Nelson killed more agents of the FBI than any other criminal. In the event, and agents of the FBI fatally wounded and killed Babyface Nelson in the Battle of Barrington on the 27th of November 1934 in a suburb of Chicago, Illinois. But more about that and on. So he was born in Chicago, as I said, on July the 4th in 1921, when he was age 12. He wouldn't have been 13 till December. He's 12 and a half, we'll give him. And he accidentally shot a playmate in the jaw with a pistol. They were out playing with a pistol that he had found. And he was sent away to reformatory school for a year. And obviously being subject, now reformatory schools at that time in the 1920s, you cannot compare them, although they were still bad in the 1980s and right up to more recent times. But at that time, you can imagine the conditions that this 12-and-a-half-year-old found himself in for 12 months in reformatory school, subjected to all kinds of unbelievable, I suppose, cruelties, both from the inmates and the staff. Now, at the age of 13, he was again arrested for car theft and joyriding, and he was sent to penal school this time for an additional 18 months. So there you go. He got off to a flying start, so to say, to his career. But he was released again on April the 11th in 1924. And so during his teens, then he joined a gang. I suppose some of that now, we're not going to make excuses for his appalling behavior, but because you always have a choice in life, you can either go down the road to the left or the road to the right, so to speak. It's up to you. And when he was in his late teens, he joined a gang and he became its leader when he was 18 or 19. Now, in 1928, at the age of 20, I suppose, yeah, he married Helen Wawrzyniak, and she's important in his life to some degree. They had 2 children together. And but by the time that he met her, he was working in a gas station in his local neighborhood, which doubled as the headquarters for the group of young tire thieves. And they were colloquially referred to as strippers. Nothing to do with what we might refer to as strippers stripping the cars. And Nelson fell into association with the strippers as a result of working in that particular gas station. And of course, he got to know all the local criminals who were sold and all of that, and he got immersed into that whole lifestyle then. So he was in it for good, so to speak. And he was eventually employed by one of them to drive bootleg alcohol throughout the Chicago suburbs. And so Nelson then eventually became associated with members of the Toohey gang, which were, I suppose, a notorious and well-known gang at the time in Chicago. You've heard all about them. So after about 2 years, Nelson and the gang were involved in the organized crime. Eventually, they, I suppose, moved up the food chain, so to speak, and moved up to armed robbery. And so in 1930, the gang they forced entry into the home of magazine executive Charles Richter, and they tied him up and cut the phone lines and ransacked the house, usual thing, and made off with $205,000 worth of jewelry, which today would be the equivalent around $3 million, I reckon, today. Directly, that's what we think. So that was a massive thing. Then 2 months later, they carried out a similar robbery of Lottie Brenner von Bülow. There are some fantastic names, aren't there? And so they got $50,000 this time worth of jewelry. And the Chicago Tribune, the Chicago newspapers at the time, nicknamed the group the Tape Bandits for obvious reasons. Anyway, in April in 1930, Nelson himself was involved in robbing a bank for the very first time, but they only got away with about $4,000, I think, at the time. And but a month later, he and his gang, they started targeting wealthy homes, and I think they netted, according to the FBI records anyway, around $25,000 worth of jewelry. And he robbed another state bank in Ithaca State Bank for $4,600, and he stole jewelry there from the mayor's wife. And the mayor of Chicago was a man known by Big Bill Thompson. So there you go. She described her attacker as saying, "This is it now. He had a baby face. He was good looking, hardly more than a boy, with dark hair, and he was wearing a grey top coat and a brown felt hat, turned down brim." So Nelson and his crew were later linked to a roadhouse robbery in Illinois. And in November 1930, in the gunfight, 3 people were killed and 3 people wounded. So now, as soon as, I mean, all the other robberies and all the other crimes they committed were very, very serious. There's no getting away from that. But as soon as you start killing people, and I'm not excusing the other robbers, as soon as you start killing people indiscriminately, then the authorities will bring all guns blazing, so to speak. And well, I mean, they're in serious trouble then. Well, 3 people were killed and 3 people were wounded in the ensuing gunfight. And 3 nights later, actually, Nelson's gang, they robbed a pub, and Nelson committed his first murder that they know, I think of note, when he shot stockbroker Edwin R. Thompson. Now, I don't know whether that Edward R. Thompson, I couldn't get a link with the wife of the Chicago mayor, Big Bill Thompson. I don't know if anybody has any information on that link. I don't know. In researching it, I couldn't find any link, but I'm not saying there isn't any, or there is, I don't know. So then all through 1931 and 1932, this gang were just absolutely rampaging throughout, throughout the winter of 1931, most of the tape bandits were rounded up, including Nelson. And the Chicago Tribune referred to their leader as George Babyface Nelson. Officially in the newspapers, Chicago Tribune or newspapers, he referred to as George Babyface Nelson. So it stuck to him. And he received a sentence of 1 year to life in the state penitentiary at Joliet. Of course, this is what Nelson escaped during a prison transfer in February 1932. And through his contacts back to the Toohey gang, he fled west to Reno, Nevada, where he was harbored by William Graham, a known crime boss and gambler. Using the alias Jimmy Johnson, Nelson went to California, where he worked as a bootlegger with Joe Parente. And during his San Francisco Bay Area sojourn, I suppose, criminal adventures, Nelson met John Paul Chase and Fatso Negri, who later became close associates of Babyface Nelson. So Nelson then first met the well-known Alvin Karpis. Now, all these people were huge in crime all over the United States. And they introduced him to the famous bank robber at the time, Eddie Benz. So Nelson teamed up with Benz and they returned back to the Midwest in the summer after that. And then they robbed the bank, of course, in Grand Haven, Michigan in 1933. And the robbery was not lucrative. So though most of those involved in, they made a full escape anyway. But the Grand Haven bank robbery convinced Babyface Nelson he was ready to lead his own gang. So there you go now. So through all the connections he had made when he was in prison and during his sojourn in Reno, Nevada and San Francisco and all of that, they robbed the First National Bank in Minnesota of $32,000, I think. $32,000 in 1933. And witnesses reported that Nelson himself wildly sprayed submachine gun fire at bystanders as he made his getaway. And after collecting his wife Helen and his 4-year-old son Ronald, Nelson left with the crew and they drove off down to Texas. While there, his gang bought extra hardware, so to speak, through their connections in the underworld, of course, you know. And so one of Nelson's actual pieces of equipment, so to speak, was a 38 Super Colt pistol that he had got modified so that it was actually fully automatic pistol, you know, which was very handy, I suppose, for his purposes anyway. And he used that particular gun to kill Special Agent Carter Baum at Little Bohemia Lodge several months later. So that's how they were able to link it back. Anyway. But in 1933, a local woman tipped off San Antonio police regarding the presence of high-powered northern gangsters. And 2 days later, Tommy Carroll was cornered by two detectives and opened fire, killing Detective Perrin and wounding Detective Al Hartman. Now, all the Nelson gang, except Nelson himself, they all fled to San Antonio. But Nelson and his wife traveled west to the San Francisco Bay Area because he had very good connections down there to hole up and relax, whatever he wanted to do. And that's then while he was down in the San Francisco Bay Area, he recruited Paul Chase and Fatso Negri for a new wave of bank robberies the following spring. You're tuned to lyricmedia.tv with myself, Pat Perry, and this program is Heroes and Icons, episode 8 of Heroes and Icons, and all our programs can be found on our YouTube channel, Lyric Media TV. Now, we look at different characters that made, I suppose, a mark for their lives, whether it's for nefarious reasons or altruistic reasons. You can be the judge of that yourself, but certainly there's no doubt about our character today, Babyface Nelson. His notoriety was for all the wrong reasons. And of course, the FBI at the time were coming to grips with organized crime that they were faced with in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s. But certainly that time, there was a huge amount of, because you must remember, after the Wall Street crash in 1929, they were pretty dire for an awful lot of people. For the majority of the population, particularly in rural America, were absolutely suffering appallingly. So, I mean, hence the void was filled with gangsters and opportunists and all of that. Now, there's a story in the films that are being made on the story of Babyface Nelson and John Dillinger. So on March the 3rd, 1934, John Dillinger made his famous wooden pistol escape from jail in Crown Point, Indiana. Now, obviously, the details of that remain in dispute, but the escape is suspected to have been arranged and financed by members of the Nelsons' newly formed gang, including Homer Van Maher, Tommy Carroll, Eddie Green, and John Red Hamilton. There's a story there, all of those guys by themselves, but anyway, with the understanding that Dillinger would repay some part of the bribe money out of his share of his first robbery he committed when he got out of prison. An IOU note given to John and Dillinger by Babyface Nelson, who would have thought. Anyway, the night Dillinger arrived in the Twin Cities, Nelson and his friend John Paul Chase were cut off by another car driven by a local paint salesman, which was Theodore Kidder. Nelson lost his temper and gave chase, crowding Kidder to the curb. The salesman exited his vehicle in protest, whereupon Nelson shot him dead. 2 days after this, the new gang struck the Security National Bank in Sioux Falls in South Dakota, which netted around $49,000, a lot of money at the time. Nelson severely wounded the motorcycle policeman Hale Keith. Remember that scene in the film, actually. The 6 men were soon identified as the second Dillinger gang, so there you go. But the gang had no official leader. And a week after the robbery in Sioux Falls, the gang robbed the First National Bank in Mason City, Iowa. And Dillinger and Hamilton were both shot and wounded in the robbery, where they made off with $52,000. But on April the 3rd, later on, federal agents ambushed and killed Eddie Green. Though he was unarmed, they were uncertain of his identity. In the aftermath of the Mason City robbery, Nelson and John Paul Chase first went to Reno, where Billy Graham and Jimmy Kay were fighting a federal mail fraud case. And years later, the FBI determined that on March 22, 1934, Nelson and Chase abducted and killed the chief witness against the pair, Roy Fritsch. Fritsch body was said to have been thrown down in an abandoned mine shaft and never found. So this is our Babyface Nelson. Now, obviously, there's so much there about Babyface Nelson, so much crime packed into an extremely short life, a violent short life. There's no doubt about it, And eventually, Nelson was declared public enemy number 1 after the Little Bohemia shootout in the famous village, holiday village. And that's all contained in the films that were made in his life. You can see all those little bits. So on June the 7th of that year as well, another member of his gang was killed. This Tommy Carroll. He was killed while trying to evade arrest in Iowa. And Carroll and his girlfriend, Jean Crompton, who had been captured actually and was tried with Helen Gillis, had grown close to the Nelsons. But after his death was, I suppose, a personal blow to them. So anyway, on June the 27th, former gang errand runner and Little Bohemian fugitive Pat Riley was arrested in Paws, Minnesota. So now the FBI were up in their game at this stage because they couldn't have this going on, because some of these, depending on the newspaper stories and the media at the time, that the accounts you were reading, were eulogizing and treating these people in one way as Robin Hood type characters, which in no way they were not, absolutely not. No way that would have fit that. If there was ever someone who could fit that, certainly wouldn't have been Babyface Nelson and John Dillinger et al. No way in the wide world. Anyway, on the morning of June the 30th, Nelson, Dillinger, Van Meter, and one more robbed the Merchants National Bank in South Bend, Indiana. One man involved in the robbery is believed to have been Pretty Boy Floyd, based on several eyewitness identifications and the later account of Joseph Fatso Negri, the old Nelson associate from way back in California we mentioned earlier on in the show. Another rumored participant was Nelson's childhood friend Jack Perkins, also an associate of the gang at the time. Perkins was later tried for that robbery, but due to lack of evidence and eyewitness and all of that, he was acquitted. When the robbery began, Howard Wagner had been directing traffic outside as the policeman. Responding quickly to the scene, attempting to draw his gun, he was shot dead by Van Meter, who was stationed outside the bank. During the shootout that followed, Nelson exchanged fire with local jeweler Harry Berg, who had shot him in the chest ineffectively because Nelson was wearing a bulletproof vest. As Berg retreated into the store and returned, a man in a parked car was wounded. Nelson also grappled briefly with a teenage boy who tackled him until Nelson stunned Kowalski with a blow from his gun. When Dillinger and the man identified as Floyd emerged from the bank, sacks containing $28,000, they brought 3 hostages with them. Anyway, in the chaos that followed, they made their escape, and the gang escaped, and Van Meter actually recovered, and several other bystanders were wounded by the chaos, obviously with bullets flying everywhere. And it was last confirmed robbery for all of the known and suspected participants, including Pretty Boy Floyd, who I think was executed. As far as I know, he was hanged or get the electric chair. I don't know, but I know he was marched down anyway to his demise. During the month of July, there was a huge manhunt going on then at the same time as these things were happening. So on July the 22nd, 1934, then John Dillinger himself, there's a film made, I think Johnny Depp was in the film, I'm not too sure. I think Johnny Depp played John Dillinger. Dillinger was ambushed and killed by the FBI agents outside the Biograph Theater in Lincoln Park, Chicago. And the next day, the FBI made an announcement that Pretty Boy Floyd was now probably going to be number 1. And October 22nd, 1934, Pretty Boy Floyd was killed in a shoot with agents, including the famous Melvin Purvis. Subsequently, J. Edgar Hoover announced that Nelson was now public enemy number 1. Because Dillinger was dead, Pretty Boy Floyd was dead, now we're going to get you. And then on August 23rd of that year of 1934, Van Meter was ambushed and killed by police in St. Paul in Minnesota, leaving Nelson as the sole survivor of the second Dillinger gang. So in the months following that, the killing of Van Meter, following that, Nelson and his wife, usually accompanied by Chase, they drifted west to cities including Sacramento, San Francisco, California, and Reno, Las Vegas, Nevada. They often stayed in auto camps, and including Wally's Hot Springs outside Genoa, Nevada, some fantastic names, where they were hid out from October 1st, and then they returned to Chicago, the home, but they always go home to their home patch, I suppose, around November the 1st of that year. Nelson's movements during his final month of his life are largely unknown, believe it or not. Anyway, by the end of the month, the FBI had settled on a former hideout of Nelson's in the lake, beside Lake Como, in Lake Geneva in Wisconsin, where it was believed that Nelson might return for the winter. And when the Nelsons and the Chases, they did return to the inn on November 27th and briefly came face to face, surprising unprepared FBI agents who had staked it out. The fugitives sped away before any shots were fired. And armed with a description of the car, of course, and its license plate number, agents immediately flooded into the area. Now you can tell all your friends about it. This is Lear Media TV. Heroes and Icons is a show with myself, Papa. And today we're looking at the somewhat violent and appalling violent life of Babyface Nelson. A short but furious gun battle between FBI agents took place on November the 27th, 1934, outside Chicago in the town of Barrington, culminating in the deaths of Nelson and the FBI agents Herman Ed Hollis and Samuel P. Cowley. So there you go. During the ambush, Nelson yelled to his wife Helen to take cover in a nearby ditch, where he and Chase opened fire on the agents. But both Cowley and Hollis returned fire from behind the airplane, and a 45 slug eventually struck Nelson in the stomach. Nelson, leaning on the running board, then wordlessly exchanged furious fire with Chase. In the din of the gun battle, Chase heard Nelson complain that his weapon was jamming. The wounded Nelson swapped it out for either his Colt Monitor or his Winchester. Despite the wound, Nelson moved from behind the car and advanced towards the agents while firing his weapon. Two of his bullets struck Cowley. Several buckshot pellets from Holt's shotgun then struck Nelson in the legs and knocked him down. But he got to his feet again, and Hollis, possibly already wounded, moved to a better cover behind a utility pole. As he drew his service pistol, Nelson fatally shot Hollis in the head. Nelson staggered over Hollis's body, aimed his weapon at the agents falling from behind the limb towards the hip, and at the agents falling form for a moment, then limped towards the agent's Hudson. Nelson drove the car over the disabled Ford. After loading the agent's car with Ford's guns and supplies, he let Chase get behind the wheel. Now, anyway, after he sped away and took to the bed, I suppose, but he said to his wife as he was dying, because he was absolutely a lot of blood, he said his last words apparently spoken to his wife as, "I'm done for." Nelson gave directions as Chase drove to a safe house in Walnut Street in Wilmette. Nelson died in bed with his wife beside at 7:35 p.m. Of course, his body, there's some famous photographs of his body on display. People can see that when you do online, you can catch it up online. But that was the life and violent times of Babyface Nelson, a man who lived by the gun. He was, I think, 10 days short of his 28th birthday when he passed away. Our 26th birthday, I beg your pardon. Now there's a few films. By the way, Babyface Nelson and his wife Helen are buried, if you're ever over in that part of the world, are buried in St. Joseph's Cemetery in River Grove, Illinois. There you go, if you want to visit it. Babyface Nelson, a 1957 film which starred Mickey Rooney as one of his life. Then there was a 1959 film, The FBI Story, which starred James Stewart with Willem Phipps as Nelson. And then there was a 1973 film on Dillinger, which starred Richard Dreyfuss as Babyface Nelson. Then, of course, there was a 1975 TV movie which featured Elliot Street as Nelson in. The title of that is The Kansas City Massacre. And of course, there's a scene in that film, Oh Brother Where Art Thou, was made a while back, where Michael Badalucco plays Babyface Nelson in the thing, you know. Anyway, Public Enemies was a 2009 film, Johnny Depp with Stephen Graham as Nelson. In this film, Babyface Nelson is portrayed as being killed by Melvin Purvis alongside Van Meeten as shows. But really, in any film, you have to take a license to tell the story. You cannot cover every nuance in their lives, or otherwise the film will be too long and boring for people to pay attention to. The thing I loved about Public Enemies, the 2009 film, was the song by Blackbird, which was sung by Diana Krall. A little bit of information for you on that wonderful singer. That was our little thumbnail sketch of Lester Joseph Gillis, known as George Nelson himself, and I suppose when you live by the gun, you will die by the gun. I know it's an old saying, but for a man who had a potential, for all human beings who had some kind of a potential in their lives, Babyface Nelson really took to the gun, took to the violent side, and met his fate at a very young age, 26. This has been edition 8 of Heroes and Icons, and if you want to catch any more of our shows, they're up on our YouTube channel, learnmedia.tv, and our email for the show is info@learnmedia.tv. And this is Pat Barry saying goodbye for now and take care till we meet again.